Welcome to True Crime Threads, where we unravel the darkest and most chilling tales. Today we delve into the haunting story of a 16-year-old who shattered his family's world in an unthinkable act. 16-year-old Charles Davidson seemed to have it all. Living in a quiet suburban neighborhood with his parents, Rosa and Jacob, and his 12-year-old sister, Isla, the Davidson family appeared flawless to anyone who knew them. Their home, a two-story house with a manicured lawn and white picket fence, was the kind of place people associated with happiness and success. Jacob was a successful businessman who worked long hours but always made time for community events. Rosa was equally admired, known for her involvement in charity work and her active role in the neighborhood association. Isla, the youngest, was a bright and cheerful girl, excelling in school and earning medals in gymnastics. Together, the family was the picture of suburban perfection. Charles, the eldest child, was often described as quiet and polite. At school, he kept to himself but maintained good grades and a clean record. Teachers found him bright, though somewhat distant, and classmates saw him as reserved but harmless. His demeanor gave no indication of the storm brewing within him. Behind the walls of the Davidson home, Charles's life was far from ideal. He lived under constant pressure to meet his parents' high expectations. Jacob demanded academic excellence, often reminding Charles of the sacrifices made to provide for him. Rosa, while outwardly nurturing, was critical of anything less than perfection, expecting Charles to mirror the flawless image of their family. Isla, being younger and naturally gifted, often received more praise and attention, leaving Charles feeling overshadowed and inadequate. The weight of these expectations took its toll. Charles felt trapped, unable to express his frustrations for fear of disappointing his family further. Over time, his resentment grew. He began to see his parents' demands not as a push toward success but as an unrelenting reminder of his perceived failures. Isla, though innocent, became a symbol of everything he could never be: adored, admired, and effortlessly perfect. To the outside world, nothing seemed amiss. The Davidson family attended community barbecues, church events, and holiday gatherings as a unit. But within their home, tension simmered beneath the surface. Charles's quiet compliance masked his growing bitterness. One cold autumn morning, neighbors noticed something unusual. The usually bustling Davidson house was eerily quiet. The curtains remained drawn, and the family's car stayed parked in the driveway. Normally, mornings were a lively affair at the Davidsons, with Jacob heading to work, Rosa and Isla leaving for school, and Charles rushing out with his backpack. But on this particular day there was no movement, no sound, just an unsettling silence. By noon, concern turned to alarm. A family friend, worried after repeated unanswered phone calls, decided to stop by. Knocking on the door yielded no response. Eventually, they called the police. What the authorities discovered inside would haunt the community forever. The police arrived at the Davidson residence shortly after the concerned call, prepared for what they assumed would be a routine welfare check. What they encountered instead was a scene of unimaginable horror. The door was unlocked, and as officers stepped inside, they were struck by the eerie stillness that filled the air. The cozy, well-kept home now seemed ominous, its warm decor tainted by the sinister events that had unfolded within its walls. The first discovery was Jacob. He was found in the master bedroom, lying motionless on the bed. A single, precise wound to the chest ended his life. Beside him was Rosa, similarly positioned, with no signs of a struggle. Their expressions were hauntingly peaceful, as if they had been taken by surprise. The pristine bed linens were soaked with blood, their bright white turned to dark crimson. The officers moved to Isla's room next. The scene there was no less disturbing. The once cheerful space, adorned with posters of gymnasts and trophies from competitions, now bore the marks of tragedy. Isla, too, had been killed in her sleep, with a methodical precision that left investigators unnerved. The childlike innocence of the room made the violence even more jarring. As they surveyed the home, it became clear that the killer had taken great care to leave no trace of a struggle. There were no signs of forced entry, no shattered windows or disturbed furniture. It was as if the perpetrator had been a ghost, moving through the house with cold efficiency. This realization led investigators to suspect that the killer was someone who knew the family well, someone who could move freely within the home without raising alarm. Charles's absence was immediately suspicious. His room was unusually tidy, with his belongings neatly packed into a backpack that was missing. His bed, though made, showed signs of someone having slept in it recently, suggesting that he had been in the house the night before. A kitchen knife was unaccounted for, leading police to believe it had been used in the murders. The neighbors were stunned by the news. The idea that such a brutal crime could happen in their quiet, safe neighborhood was unthinkable. They struggled to reconcile the Charles they knew, a quiet, unassuming teenager, with the possibility that he had committed such an act. The case quickly became the focus of local law enforcement, who began piecing together the events of that night. While the evidence strongly pointed to Charles as the prime suspect, the lack of motive left investigators and the community searching for answers. The question loomed: what could drive a seemingly normal teenager to destroy his entire family in cold blood? As investigators delved deeper into the lives of the Davidson family, they uncovered layers of complexity that shattered the illusion of perfection. While the community had always seen the family as an ideal example of success and harmony, hidden cracks in their relationships began to emerge. Most of these revelations centered on Charles, who had lived a life far more troubled than anyone had imagined. School records painted a troubling picture. Charles had a history of disciplinary issues that his parents had carefully concealed. Though he maintained decent grades, he often displayed signs of emotional instability. Teachers reported episodes of unprovoked anger, while classmates described him as withdrawn and occasionally volatile. These behaviors were frequently dismissed by his parents as teenage mood swings, but they hinted at deeper struggles. Further scrutiny revealed a history of isolation and rejection in Charles's personal life. He had no close friends and rarely participated in social activities. His days were mostly spent alone, either at home or wandering the neighborhood aimlessly. Those who had interacted with him described him as a loner who seemed perpetually burdened by an invisible weight. A breakthrough came when investigators discovered a journal hidden beneath Charles's mattress. The entries were deeply troubling, chronicling his growing resentment toward his parents and sister. The words were filled with anger, bitterness, and a profound sense of alienation. He described feeling like an outsider in his own family, constantly overshadowed by his younger sister, Isla, who seemed to effortlessly garner their parents' praise. One entry stood out in particular. In stark, chilling detail, Charles wrote about his inability to escape the pressure his parents placed on him. He described feeling like a pawn in their pursuit of perfection, living not for himself but to fulfill their expectations. The entry ended with a haunting line, "I'll never be free unless I silence them." The journal also hinted at a mysterious relationship with someone Charles referred to as the one who finally understood. Investigators initially thought this might be a friend or accomplice, someone who had helped fuel Charles's rage. However, efforts to identify this person led nowhere, leaving the possibility of a sinister imaginary influence. The family's carefully maintained facade crumbled further when former neighbors came forward, sharing unsettling stories about Charles's behavior. They recounted incidents of cruelty toward animals, strange outbursts, and a habit of lurking in the shadows, watching people without interacting. Though these behaviors were dismissed as eccentric at the time, they now took on a darker meaning. As these pieces came together, the case became more chilling. Charles had been living a life consumed by anger and alienation, hidden behind a mask of normalcy. His journal provided insight into his fractured psyche, but it also raised more questions. Was he acting alone, or had something or someone pushed him over the edge? The deeper investigators dug, the more unsettling the answers became. The search for Charles Davidson became a full-scale manhunt as law enforcement agencies coordinated efforts to track him down. His face appeared on television screens, social media, and flyers plastered across the region. Yet, despite the widespread attention, weeks passed with no sign of him. The lack of leads left investigators frustrated, but their determination to locate the missing teenager never wavered. The first breakthrough came when a hiker stumbled upon a remote cabin deep in the woods, miles away from the nearest road. The structure appeared abandoned, but upon closer inspection, the hiker noticed signs of recent activity. Uneaten food, discarded wrappers, and faint footprints leading in and out of the area suggested someone had been staying there. The hiker contacted authorities, who quickly arrived to investigate. Inside the cabin, police found disturbing evidence that pointed directly to Charles. A series of photographs of his family, torn and defaced, were scattered across a makeshift table. Some of the images had been marked with red ink, slashes drawn across the faces of Jacob, Rosa, and Isla. The walls were adorned with crude sketches of the Davidson home, depicting dark, violent scenes. More chilling still was the discovery of weapons resembling those used in the murders. A blood-stained knife was recovered, and its blade matched the wounds found on the victims. Forensic analysis later confirmed the blood belonged to the Davidson family. This discovery cemented the cabin's connection to Charles, but curiously, there was no sign of him. However, investigators did uncover something unexpected evidence, suggesting that Charles may not have acted alone. Among the items recovered was a discarded cell phone containing text messages exchanged with someone named Kyron Brooks. The messages were graphic and unsettling, detailing plans for the murders and expressing mutual disdain for the Davidson family. Kyron's tone was encouraging, often egging Charles on with phrases like "they deserve this" and "you're finally taking control." This new lead shifted the focus of the investigation. Kyron, a troubled teenager from a nearby town with a history of run-ins with the law, became a person of interest. Known for his fascination with violence and defiance of authority, Kyron seemed a likely accomplice. His fingerprints were found on one of the weapons, adding to the mounting evidence against him. Despite the mounting clues, there was still no sign of either Charles or Kyron. The chilling possibility that they were working together only deepened the urgency of the search. Authorities now faced the daunting task of locating not one, but two dangerous individuals who had managed to evade capture. As the hunt intensified, the question remained: how far would they go to stay hidden? The manhunt for Charles Davidson and Kyron Brooks reached a fever pitch as authorities intensified their efforts, casting a wider net to track the elusive teenagers. With each passing day, public fear grew, fueled by rumors of their whereabouts and the possibility of further violence. The discovery of their partnership had added a chilling layer to the case, turning it from a family tragedy into a broader threat. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Surveillance footage from a gas station in a neighboring state captured two individuals matching the descriptions of Charles and Kyron. They appeared disheveled, wearing clothing that looked worn and dirty. In the footage, Charles seemed withdrawn, keeping his head low, while Kyron was animated, gesturing wildly as they spoke. They purchased basic supplies and left quickly, disappearing before authorities could arrive. The footage confirmed that the two were traveling together and likely moving frequently to avoid detection. Investigators focused on their known habits and connections, narrowing down potential hideouts. One critical lead came from an old acquaintance of Kyron's, who revealed that Kyron often spoke about an abandoned factory in a remote area where he claimed no one would ever find him. Acting on this tip, a team of officers conducted a raid on the location. The factory, a sprawling complex of rusted metal and broken windows, was eerily quiet as they moved in. Inside, they found signs of recent activity: sleeping bags, empty food cans, and a fire pit still warm to the touch. However, the pair had once again vanished, leaving behind a series of chilling notes scrawled on the walls. Phrases like "we'll never be caught" and "this is just the beginning" were written in bold, uneven handwriting, seemingly taunting law enforcement. One particularly unsettling message read, "Freedom is ours now." The taunts only strengthened the resolve of the investigators, who believed the pair was growing more desperate and careless. The final confrontation came weeks later in the woods near a remote campsite. A tip from a local hunter led authorities to a heavily forested area where the teenagers were hiding. A tense standoff ensued as police surrounded the campsite. Charles was found sitting quietly near the fire, his expression blank and detached. Kyron, however, was armed and refused to surrender. In a chaotic exchange, Kyron attempted to flee, leading to a brief but intense chase. He was ultimately subdued and taken into custody. Charles, who offered no resistance, was arrested without incident. Both were transported to a secure facility, where investigators began piecing together the full scope of their actions. As the case unraveled in court, the story of Charles Davidson shocked the nation. A once promising teenager, consumed by anger and manipulated by a dangerous influence, had committed an unspeakable act. The courtroom revelations left many wondering whether Charles was a cold-blooded killer or a victim of circumstances beyond his control.